Sometimes you'll come across someone who seems to be reacting very oversensitively, that they're getting really strong and concerned and worked up about something you would have thought was a nothing. I think of a chap who I was living with very recently, and he got the smell of cooking in his bedroom when they were cooking in the kitchen downstairs. And of course the others did too, but to him it was intolerable, and he became upset, somewhere between upset and angry, you know what I mean? And generally, if you like, caused an upset in the household. And I know I was resisting it instead of just flowing with it. And it seemed important to me that I did not comply with his request of either not cooking in the evening or leaving the window wide open so that the air was completely fresh and carried outside. Wasn't clear that would necessarily do it, and perhaps he wasn't either. But I too started to react against him. You see, that it was very important to me that I had the freedom to cook in the kitchen without, if you like, freezing the room by having the window open in winter. Do you see, we were both locked into fighting over what might seem to be trivia. But if you step back from it, perhaps it wasn't. It's trivia to people whose lives are not threatened by such a thing, but if your life has been a stress which you've just coped with, it can be seen as something intolerable because it's too much on top of what you were just about coping with. And well, I decided on reflection, following day, that the upset was far more important than the trivia of complying to what he seems to need. And I just said, I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't say I would comply, but I knew it no longer was an issue with me. I would comply, in fact, and either not cook in the evening or open the window. And I wasn't at all sure that the rest of the household would do so, but somehow it didn't matter to me anymore, thank goodness. I decided that the upset was far more costly than the compliance. I mean, I don't think he did. I don't think he thought in his mind, I can put up with it after all, if people cook in the evening or if I smell cooking in my bedroom. You seem to smell cooking in the bedroom when the door was open or shut up there, apparently. And you couldn't shut off the kitchen. It was part of the lounge, part of the hallway, part of the landing upstairs, But the where and whatnot of it became irrelevant to me. I would like it to have been also for him. I don't know whether it was or not. Don't think it had changed for him. It was still important enough for me to think I should comply and do as requested, But do you see, you can be at war and there can be discord over what seems to be pretty trivial, minor thing for either side to comply with, put up with, or whatever, but you don't, perhaps because of some underlying fear that it represents or seems to create and cause you to be so worked up, and this is important and I must have my way. And of course you don't need to if you're trusting God. You might say in your heart, well, this is unusual, but okay, I can run with this. See what happens. I mean, who knows what God will do with it. Perhaps I'm not supposed to cook in the evening, it's not a good idea to have a cooked meal before I go to bed. Perhaps it's right in some other way. Who knows? I don't need to resist. And equally, had I been him, I could have done something similar and thought, well, perhaps I'll open my window and let the smell out of my bedroom rather than him having to do it down there while he's cooking, which is, after all, not that unreasonable to cook in the evening, and so on and so forth. Do you see, either of us might have had the wherewithal to follow a more peaceful path. We didn't at the time. I did subsequently, and I was pleased about that. It was helped by the fact that I expected to move shortly anyway, and so let me pause a sec. Yes, let me take another instant. At the church I was at, it's a Pentecostal church. You would have thought the Pentecostal embrace and hug was acceptable, but it wasn't to certain older ladies. They felt terribly strongly against it indeed. I mean, they didn't mind the pastor doing it, and they didn't mind women to women having a hug, but men to women, it was just not acceptable. In fairness, I think such ladies were not of Pentecostal origin. They may have been of rather more less expressive and strict fundamentalist background. And not that Pentecostals aren't fundamentalists in some ways, of course. But it was terribly important to them. And the pastor rightly said, well, it may be very important to them because of an unfortunate history and experiences that they may have had. And so we should comply. I felt this was persuasive with me too, except I felt it was, one is I couldn't identify, I wasn't told who the ladies were, and I assume it was ladies, of course. I didn't take it very well, but I did appreciate his argument in some sense that, yeah, fair enough, how important is it to me to... But unfortunately, it did seem important to me. I was always very against ever embracing a woman other than my wife. I felt it was in some sense unfaithful. But of course I no longer have a wife, for 7 years at least. But that aside, I still felt it was a very good expression of love in the most earnest Christian way. And I embrace not just women, of course, I embrace men as well. I give them a hug, a very strong hug in that case, because in some sense I'm expressing man to man that we're solidly with each other. I don't know if you can quite follow what I mean here, but I found that harder to comply with. And I did, but it became rather difficult, especially as those women that were more accepting of me very often offered a hug. And so I didn't feel to decline it was at all right, you know. It left me with a very strange situation. And I think possibly, although I don't know, those ladies too, that they eventually were responsible, I suspect, and I do not know because I don't even know who they were. That wasn't going to be revealed to me. I think they may have been instrumental in, to put it politely, easing me out of the church, getting rid of me. Do you see, these things can be very important to people. There can be amazing discord that you really didn't expect, and you can underestimate the consequences of such down the line, so to speak. I'm sort of tempted to say it's best to comply with requests, even if the requests are not put very nicely. You know, they might be behind your back gossip and so forth. Or if you can't comply, you know, you feel it's just too important in some sense, a question of principle, but you feel too threatened by having to comply, then it's probably for the best to work towards some exit strategy where you don't have to comply with such request. And this may not be available. Should you now courageously do what you think is right and be at war with those people who are making such demands upon you? I don't think so, but there may be demands that you cannot meet as a question of earnest principle to God. Then life is going to be difficult. What are you going to do then? Well, you're going to presumably not meet the request, stay where you are and put up with the flack and live with the consequences of such. I'm tempted to say it would be better to comply, constantly looking to God for solution perhaps, or even attempting constantly to God to accept that in some way this is a blessing that you do not understand, but you're going to trust Him for. I think that would be better. It might suppress who you are for a while, but I suspect either it will become not a burden, or God will open up an exit strategy for you, or even take away the very person from, well, persons in this case, I gather, that would impose upon you. Well, in the case of the church, I found that I couldn't comply entirely with the pastor's demands, request that I don't embrace any women at all. It didn't happen. Women did embrace me, and I think the murmurings continued against me and were responsible for finally me leaving. And it's been a great blessing to leave. There were minor costs in that no longer get the terrific worship of that particular church, which was outstanding and in worship. And there were people I no longer see who were meaningful to me and important. Not all, of course. Some continue contact with me, and you could say, well, they're the real ones that count. I don't know. I think everybody counts in a sense. That's a bad way of speaking, but but no, I can certainly see that leaving was a blessing and opens up possibilities for the future that are perhaps lovelier. Our God is an awesome God, and He loves us, and if He's allowing discord, it's because it's going to be a blessing in some way, either because you find some way of resolving it and staying with it, so to speak, or because He moves it, or because He moves you out of it with an exit strategy, so to speak. But either way, it's a wonderful opportunity to trust Him, isn't it? And rejoice, not take it as some terrible burden, some great cost, some unfortunate evil outcome, but on the contrary, a blessing from God that you don't yet understand. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, let me review a rather extreme case. Well, let's take the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego situation. The king insists that you, worship him, or worship him. It was, wasn't it? And they feel they can't do this because they're devoted to their God as a Hebrew people. And well, really, if you think about it, does God honestly care whether you worship something else or not? If you're forced to, and in your heart you love Him, does He really want you to, be thrown in the fire to keep your principle? I don't think so. I think He knows the heart, and many people will simply comply with the demands of this rather frightening king. And God understands and knows that your heart is longing for Him and loving Him. So I think the story is, in some sense, misconstructed, misplaced, misunderstood, but is a wonderful expression of and even if our God does not rescue us from the fiery furnace, still we will not worship you. Which is to say, really, still we could not love you. We know what we value. If it's saying that, well, I run with the story as a great lesson to us. But if I run with the story with the interpretation that we should worship God only, come what may, I would say, no, that's invalid. We should love God, come what may, yes, but love is something that's not necessarily able to be expressed, and there may be very wicked, unreasonable duress upon us to make us not express it. And I would rather my children succumbed, gave into such forced, unreasonable, devastating imposition. They're still my children. They still love me. They may be forced to outwardly worship something else, but I know the heart of the matter. And I certainly do not wish them to suffer simply because this villain, so to speak, is forcing them to declare that I'm of no value to them, or that he is of greater value. Let them comply. I don't want to be heavy about this, but I will deal with the king in due course. And it's all part of this mixture of good and evil that I allow in the world to teach us what really matters and what doesn't. I'm not interested in worship. And I'm not personally either, as a person. I don't want people to worship me. I do so appreciate it though when they love me. They may or may not be forced to worship. Whatever they're forced to worship, it's irrelevant to me. What matters to me is the heart. They value me in their heart. Last thing I want them to do is suffer because of the imposition of some evil giant upon them. I'll deal with the giant. And in the story, God did deal with the giant, of course. The flames had no effect on Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, and indeed there was a fourth person seen in the fire, which many a Christian thinks was Jesus. At the very least an angel, come to rescue them. So, good story, but don't take the wrong lesson. Don't assume the story means you cannot worship some evil imposition upon you where it is bearing down on you and threatening harm. I would rather you complied. I'll deal with him in the fullness of time. And I certainly won't reject you. I know your heart, and that's what matters to me. Our God is a lovely God. Truly loves and cares for you. Wonderful one. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Now you may say to me, well, there'd be no martyrs in that case, because a martyr is someone who is forced by the religion of the day or the state or whatever to being forced to, in some sense, disown God outwardly by some act or lack of act, not allowed to take, I don't know, communion, Eucharist or something, or whatever it is the imposition on them is. And he's a martyr because he resists, and it's all considered wonderful and noble. Well, I tell you, it isn't. Well, it is in a way, but I don't require you to be a martyr, for goodness sake. I don't want my children to suffer. Comply. I know your heart. That's what matters to me. And it matters to me too that you do not suffer because of some evil purpose and imposition. I will deal with it in the fullness of time, and I'll deal with the evil in the fullness of time. Change it or confine it, or so that it doesn't do harm. You are free to comply if you don't want to, so to speak. You know what I mean? You're not allowed to use the name of your God. Not allowed to pray in public, not allowed to evangelize, not allowed to meet, forced to meet in worshipping other gods. I understand. but in your heart you long to be free to worship me. That's what matters to me. Surely you see that. I love you. I understand your dilemma. Please be reasonable. Not interested in the outward appearance. I look upon the heart, and I love you.